The bread basket slipped from Mara's hands the second the bride slapped it out of them. Warm rolls scattered across the marble floor like coins in a church, and 100 well-dressed guests burst into laughter. Security grabbed Mara by the wrist. Then the groom's father rose from his chair and shouted, "Take your hands off my daughter!" For a second, even the violinists forgot to breathe. If stories like this hit you somewhere deep, subscribe, like the video, and stay with me to the end. Because what happened in that wedding hall did not just ruin a ceremony. It opened a grave that should never have been sealed. Mara stood frozen in the middle of the aisle, flowers still dusted on the sleeves of her plain brown dress, her hair damp from the rain outside, her wrist caught in a guard's hand. She looked nothing like the women in silk gowns staring at her with disgust. Nothing like the polished people sitting beneath crystal chandeliers with champagne in their fingers and judgment in their eyes. She looked like somebody who had entered through the wrong door. The bride, Bianca, still held the edge of her white veil with one hand and the contempt in her smile with the other. "Your daughter?" she said, laughing like the words themselves were dirty. "Alejandro, this woman was carrying bread through the service entrance." Murmurs spread instantly. "She's insane. Is this some kind of setup? Maybe she planned this." Mara pulled her arm free from the guard and took a step back. "I didn't plan anything," she said, breath shaky but voice steady. "I came because your kitchen was missing half the order. Chef Renato sent me in with the emergency trays. I was going to leave." "Then you should have left," Bianca snapped, "before you started stealing attention." The room laughed again. Mara's face didn't break. That almost made it worse. She bent down and started picking up the fallen bread one by one, because poor people learn early that humiliation is easier to survive when your hands stay busy. Then Alejandro Valle, the groom's father, came down from the altar steps as if he were walking through fire. He stopped in front of her and stared, not at her face first, but at the small silver medallion hanging from her neck. Half a sun, worn thin with age. His fingers shook before he even touched it. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. Mara instinctively covered it with her hand. "My mother." "What was her name?" She hesitated. Something in his voice had frightened her more than Bianca's cruelty. Cruelty she understood. This was different. This sounded like a man standing on the edge of losing his mind. "My mother's name was Sophia," Mara said. Alejandro closed his eyes like the answer had struck him in the chest. Rafael, the groom, stepped forward from beside Bianca. "Dad, what's going on?" Alejandro didn't look at him. He kept looking at Mara, at the shape of her jaw, the nervous way she pressed her lips together, the tiny crescent scar near her left eyebrow. Sophia had that same scar after she fell from a bicycle at 16. "No," Bianca said sharply. "No, absolutely not. We are not doing this here." But the room was already theirs now. Alejandro asked the question like he was afraid of the answer. "When were you born?" "April 11th. His face drained. Rafael frowned. "Why does that matter?" Because April 11th was the date Alejandro had buried in his soul for 26 years. The day he had been told the woman he loved ran away in disgrace after giving birth to a dead child. The day he stopped believing happiness was meant to survive in his family. Bianca grabbed Rafael's arm. "This is ridiculous. She probably overheard something. These people do that." Mara looked up at her then, and there was something in her eyes sharper than anger. "These people?" Bianca opened her mouth, but Mara beat her to it. "I carried your bread through the storm because your chef was panicking," she said. "I came through the back because that's where your staff pointed. I kept my head down because I knew the second somebody saw my shoes, they'd remind me I didn't belong here. I didn't ask to be seen. And I definitely didn't ask to be insulted by a woman who can't even be kind on the happiest day of her life. A low sound moved through the guests. That one landed. Bianca's face hardened. "Throw her out." "No one touches her," Alejandro said. That was when the wedding truly stopped being a wedding. The musicians lowered their instruments. Phones began to rise from tables. A little girl holding flower petals whispered to her mother, "Why is the bride angry?" And right in the middle of all that money and whiteness and polished silver, Mara realized every eye in the room had turned her into a story she didn't understand yet. She wanted to run. But Alejandro said the one thing that nailed her to the floor. "I knew your mother." Mara went still. Not many people said Sophia's name anymore. Sophia had sold bread in a tiny corner stall near the bus station. She had hands that cracked in winter and eyes that always looked tired even when she smiled. She never told full stories, only broken pieces. A rich family, a promise, a lie. A daughter who must never beg for love. She died 6 months earlier, coughing into a towel she kept hiding behind her back, still apologizing for leaving Mara with debts and a bakery cart and too many questions. And now, in a hall full of people who wouldn't have looked twice at her on the street, one of the richest men in the city was saying he knew the woman who spent half her life kneading dough at midnight. "How?" Mara asked, and the word came out smaller than she wanted. Alejandro looked as if he hated himself for breathing. "Because I loved her." That hit the room harder than thunder. Raphael actually stumbled back. Bianca let out a humorless laugh. "So that's what this is. A ghost from one of your affairs decides to crash our wedding." Alejandro turned slowly. "Watch your mouth." She smiled, but there was panic behind it now. "Why? Because now the bread seller matters?" Mara flinched. Alejandro heard it, and maybe that was the first moment he understood the cost of what had been stolen. Not just the years, not just the truth. The way his silence had allowed the world to teach this woman she was less than everyone in it. "Raphael," he said without taking his eyes off Bianca. "The wedding is paused." Bianca stared at him. "Paused?" "It is not continuing until I know the truth." She laughed again, but now it sounded desperate. "With all due respect, Alejandro, the truth is standing in front of us. She's wearing a cheap dress and carrying dinner rolls." Mara's jaw tightened. Alejandro's voice dropped so low people leaned in to hear it. "My mother gave Sophia that medallion when she found out she was pregnant," he said. "And she did it because she wanted to mark what she planned to erase." Silence. A glass slipped from someone's hand in the back and shattered. Bianca blinked. "What?" Alejandro looked at Mara. "Come with me, please. I'm not going anywhere alone with people like you." "Fair." That answer surprised him. It also, strangely, made him believe more. Mara lifted her chin. "Whatever you have to say it where everyone can hear. I'm tired of rich families doing private damage and public smiling." A few guests looked down at their plates. Alejandro nodded once. "Then everyone will hear." He turned to the crowd. "This woman may be my daughter." The room exploded. Questions, gasps, accusations, whispered calculations about inheritance, scandal, headlines. Raphael dragged a hand down his face. "Dad, for God's sake, you can't make a claim like that in the middle of my wedding." Alejandro finally looked at his son, and there was old pain in his eyes. "If this is true, then your wedding is not the only thing that has been delayed for 26 years. That line silenced him. Mara didn't know what to do with her own breathing. She wanted to call it nonsense, a mistake, cruelty disguised as hope. But part of her, the smallest and most dangerous part, remembered things her mother used to say on nights when the shop was empty and the rain made the windows shake. If a man named Alejandro Valle ever looks at you like he's seen a ghost, walk away before hope humiliates you. At the time, Mara thought it was just one more warning from a tired woman who trusted almost nobody. Now she wasn't so sure. Bianca folded her arms. Fine. Since we're apparently turning my wedding into a street theater confession, let's ask the obvious. If she's your daughter, where has she been all these years? And why does she arrive today of all days? Mara answered before Alejandro could. I didn't arrive for him, she said. I arrived for payment. The bakery was short-staffed. My landlord is waiting on rent. Real life doesn't stop because rich people are getting married. A few of the kitchen staff near the side doors lowered their eyes. They knew that part was true. Alejandro swallowed. Did your mother ever tell you about me? Mara laughed once, bitter and exhausted. She told me enough to make me hate you. Not enough to stop me wondering. That landed too. Raphael looked between them, torn between shock and embarrassment and something darker. Fear, maybe, that his family was bigger and uglier than he knew. Bianca saw it too. She grabbed his hand. Raphael, don't let this woman destroy today. But he didn't answer, because for the first time, he was looking at Mara not as an interruption, but as a person. And she looked devastated. Alejandro asked softly, What did Sofia tell you? Mara didn't answer right away. She looked at the bread still scattered across the polished floor, at the marks of expensive shoes stepping around food her mother would have kissed off the ground rather than waste. Then she said, She told me she once believed a man loved her enough to stand against his family. She told me she was wrong. Alejandro shut his eyes. There it was. Not proof. Worse. Memory. And suddenly the grand hall vanished for him. He was 24 again, standing in the rain behind his mother's estate, Sofia laughing because her hands smelled like yeast and oranges, promising she would teach their child to bake before she learned to speak. He heard his own voice swearing he would protect them. He had believed that too. He had just never realized he was the weakest person in the room. What happened to her? He asked. Mara's throat moved before the words did. She worked. She coughed. She lied and said she was fine. She sold bread when she had fever. She skipped meals so I could finish school. Then she got sick for real. And even when she could barely stand, she still woke up before dawn to knead dough, because debt collectors don't care if your lungs are filling up. The hall had gone so quiet, the rain outside sounded close. She died apologizing, Mara said. Do you know how cruel life has to be for a mother like that to die saying sorry? No one laughed now. Not even Bianca. Alejandro looked wrecked. I didn't know. Mara turned on him so fast it startled even her. That is not the comfort you think it is. He took the blow without moving. Good, she thought. Let him. Because this was the part no one ever saw when they judged women like Sofia. They saw flour on skirts and assumed failure. They never saw cracked hands wrapping bread in old paper while pretending not to be hungry. Alejandro spoke carefully, like each word had to pass through broken glass. The day Sophia disappeared, my mother told me she stole jewelry and ran. Weeks later, I was told she delivered a stillborn baby in a clinic outside the city. I searched for her. How long? He hesitated. That hesitation said everything. How long? Mara repeated. Not long enough. The truth sat between them like an open wound. Raphael looked at his father with a kind of disappointment that only sons carry. You let Grandma decide what was true? Alejandro didn't defend himself. I was a coward. Bianca scoffed under her breath. And now we all have to suffer through your guilt. That did it. Raphael turned to her. Can you stop, just for 1 minute? She stared at him, offended that he had chosen his tone with her over her comfort. I'm trying to save our wedding. No, he said quietly. You're trying to save the performance. A murmur went through the room again. Bianca's cheeks flushed. Excuse me? But before he could answer, a voice came trembling from the back. I know that medallion. Everyone turned. An elderly woman in a black staff uniform stepped out from near the curtains. Teresa. She had worked for the Vale family longer than most guests had been alive. The kind of woman invisible until truth needed a witness. Alejandro stared at her. Teresa. She looked at Mara and began to cry. I wrapped you in a blue blanket, she said. Mara didn't move. Teresa pressed a hand to her mouth. You were born early. Sophia was shaking so hard she couldn't hold you at first. She kept asking for Alejandro. Kept saying he promised he'd come. Alejandro went pale. Bianca snapped. What exactly is this woman doing? But Teresa kept going. Maybe because she had spent too many years choking on silence. Your mother, she said to Mara, came to the old chapel house that night because Mrs. Vale's men were looking for her. They said she embarrassed the family. She was bleeding. She was terrified. I helped her. I sent word to Alejandro, but the letter never reached him. Alejandro's head turned slowly toward the front table where his late mother's portrait stood among white flowers. Then toward his sister Camila, who had been silent all this time. Camila's face didn't change, and that, somehow, was the worst part. Say something, Alejandro said. Camila lifted her chin. Elegant, controlled, cold. Mother protected this family. Mara felt the ground tilt beneath her. Raphael whispered, Aunt Camila. Teresa's voice shook harder. Sophia wrote letter after letter. I gave them to Camila because Mrs. Vale had forbidden anyone from contacting Alejandro directly. She said she would handle it. Alejandro stepped toward his sister. Did you? Camila looked around the room full of donors, businessmen, politicians, women in pearls, men with reputations. The audience she had spent a lifetime impressing. Then she made the mistake villains always make. She chose pride over denial. She was a bakery girl carrying your bastard child, Camila said. Mother had already arranged your marriage. The family name would have been destroyed. Mara heard the word bastard, and everything inside her went white. Raphael stared as if he didn't recognize his own blood. Alejandro's voice came out hollow. You told me my child died. Camila didn't blink. Because it was better than watching you ruin your future. And Sophia? She should have disappeared quietly. Instead, she kept writing. Mara took one slow step toward her.
So my mother begged, and you burned it.
Camilla's lips parted, but not from remorse. From annoyance that the poor woman was standing so close.
It was done, she said. And look around. We built something magnificent.
Mara laughed. It was not a happy sound.
You built chandeliers on top of a woman's life.
That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. Bianca looked around wildly, realizing the room had turned. Guests were no longer watching Mara with contempt. They were watching the family with disgust. So she did the cruelest thing left to her. She smiled at Mara and said,
Even if all this is true, what do you want? Money? A surname? To sit at our table after selling bread on a sidewalk?
Alejandro spun toward her, furious, but Mara stopped him with one hand. Because suddenly Mara understood something. Bianca wasn't just afraid of scandal, she was terrified of someone arriving from below and proving that Grace had nothing to do with class. Mara walked to the nearest table, picked up one of the untouched dinner knives, and used it to cut a fallen loaf cleanly in half. The sound was small, but in the silence it carried. My mother sold this kind of bread for 20 years, she said. At 5 in the morning, construction workers lined up for it. Nurses bought it after night shifts. Bus drivers bought it with coins. Hungry children bought the last stale pieces at dusk because that's what they could afford. So don't ever say selling bread like it makes a person small. She set the knife down. The smallest person in this room is the one who thinks kindness lowers status. Bianca's face shattered. A guest near the front actually clapped once before catching himself. Raphael looked at Bianca for a long, long second. And in that second, their marriage died. She's right, he said. Bianca turned to him as if she'd been slapped. What? He removed her hand from his arm. Gently. Finally. I spent 2 years telling myself your sharpness was confidence, he said. I told myself your cruelty was stress. I told myself the way you spoke to staff, to drivers, to anyone who couldn't benefit you, would get softer once life settled. He looked at the bread on the floor, then at Mara, then at his father. But if this is who you are when everything is beautiful, I don't want to know who you become when life gets ugly. The room inhaled. Bianca's lips trembled. You are ending this because of her? No, Raphael said. I'm ending this because of you. And there it was. The public humiliation had found its true owner. Bianca ripped off her veil. You pathetic coward. You would throw away our future for a stranger? Alejandro answered before Raphael could. She is not the stranger, he said. For the first time all day, Camilla looked uncertain. Because power only feels permanent until someone in the family finally chooses truth over comfort. Mara should have felt victory. Instead, she felt tired. Too tired for revenge. Too tired for fairy tales. She looked at Alejandro and asked the question that mattered most. If you had known, she said, voice barely above a whisper, would you have come? No one moved. Alejandro's eyes filled. Yes. Mara nodded slowly. Then you should spend the rest of your life remembering that my mother died, never seeing you prove it. That broke him. He sat down in the nearest chair like his legs had failed.
A man rich enough to buy buildings, broken by a sentence no money could answer.
Teresa came forward with shaking hands and pulled something from her apron pocket. A bundle of old letters tied with faded string.
I kept these,
She said.
I couldn't burn them. I couldn't bury all of it.
Alejandro took them like they were alive. The top one was stained from water or tears. He opened it. My love, if this reaches you, I need you to know she has your eyes. I named her Mara because she arrived during the storm, and I was afraid the world would always feel like weather to her. But when she sleeps, she smiles like you. If you have abandoned us, I will survive it. If you were lied to, I pray God punishes them more than I can. Alejandro couldn't keep reading. Mara looked away. She had seen her mother cry exactly 3 times in her life. Once when the bakery oven broke, once when Mara graduated, and once late at night when she thought Mara was asleep and she held one of those missing letters to her chest. Now Mara finally understood why the paper had been worn soft. Alejandro stood, crossed the distance between them, and then stopped at arm's length, as if he knew he had no right to close the rest. I cannot ask you to forgive me, he said. I cannot ask you to call me father. But if you let me, I will spend whatever is left of my life trying to become someone your mother was not wrong to love. Mara stared at him. People love dramatic reunions in stories. They imagine running, tears, instant belonging. Real life is crueler. Real life leaves too much wreckage for immediate happiness. So when Mara spoke, her voice was honest. I don't know you. He nodded. I know. I don't trust this family. You shouldn't. I don't need your money. I'll never insult you by assuming that's what this is. That answer mattered, more than he probably knew. Raphael stepped forward then, no longer groom, just son and maybe brother if she allowed it one day. You don't owe any of us grace, he said, but I'm sorry for how you were treated the second you walked in. Mara looked at him, surprised. He meant it. Across the hall, Bianca had gone completely still, as if she had just understood that all the elegance in the world cannot save a person once everyone sees the ugliness underneath. Camila turned to leave. Alejandro's voice stopped her. If you walk out now, you walk out of this family forever. She faced him slowly. Over her? Alejandro looked at Mara, then at the letters, then at the portrait of the mother who had taught him obedience and called it duty. Not over her, he said. Over what you did to her. Camilla's face finally cracked. Not with guilt, with the realization that control had ended. She left without another word. The storm outside softened into a slow whisper against the windows. Guests began to slip out, not because they were bored, but because they had witnessed something too intimate to applaud. The flowers still glowed. The candles still burned. The wedding cake stood untouched, beautiful and irrelevant. Mara looked at the ruined aisle and the crushed rolls on the marble. My mother would hate this waste, she said quietly. Alejandro almost smiled through the grief. Sophia always said bread deserved respect. Mara glanced at him sharply. She used to say, if bread hits the floor, kiss your fingers and thank God somebody had enough to drop it. Alejandro's breath caught. She said that to me the first day I met her. Something softened then. Not healed, not fixed, just softened. Alejandro bent down, picked up one unbroken loaf from the silver tray, and held it out to her with both hands, not like a gift, but like an offering. Mara stared at it, then at him. Then, very slowly, she took it. And in that shattered wedding hall, with the bride gone cold, the groom standing in silence, the guests whispering their way into the night, and the smell of fresh bread still warm in the air, a daughter who had been mocked for carrying food became the only person in the room who brought truth to the table. Some families are built with money. Some are built with lies. And sometimes, all it takes to expose both is one loaf of bread and a girl brave enough to carry it through the wrong door.